Alright everybody, this is not my first video, although it was always intended to be, but it was way too long and would not upload, so I'm going to try this again. So consider this part one of a discussion on Douglas Ernst's great and fantastic comic book graphic novel called Soulfinder. And you can see right now up on the screen is the link to the Indiegogo, or not a link, I'll have a link in the description. It's apparently already done its run, but I'm sure if you get in touch with him, he probably has some overages, and I've been assured that he's going to have another installment coming up sometime soon. Probably in months, maybe this year, maybe next, but you never know. Anyway, I would find it hard to believe that he would not do a reprint, and it's very much worth your while in getting it. So let's take a look at the book. Turn this off. And yeah, I've got a counter. I'm hopefully going to keep this in about 15 minutes, but I'm desperately long-winded, and I have some notes too to help me sort of get along. So I'm going to try and get through the first maybe 15 pages on it. So Doug Ernst, if you don't know Soulfinder, and of course if you're finding this, you're probably already very much aware of what's going on in the last 3 to 4 or 5 years of comic books, in which the two majors, Marvel and DC, have kind of lost their way, and the industry really is kind of dying. And a movement sort of popped up of basically a fan revolt. People who really love the art form and care for it, as I do myself. In fact, when I was growing up, one of the two things I ever wanted to be was a comic book artist or an astronaut. And back in the 70s, of course, being an astronaut meant that you had to cut your hair, and I had gloriously long locks. Of course, I started cutting my hair short when we got into the 80s. So much for being an astronaut. But I have done comic books. I since have gone into making computer games. That's what I spend my time as an artist doing now. But I am going to be returning, and one of the reasons why I'm starting this series is to look at the success rate of other people that have been part of this fan revolt. And of course, Doug was one of the early ones. He's been sort of harping on the decline of both the quality of writing, and I would say I kind of noped out in the mid-90s, basically. I've collected since the early 80s for over 10 years. I've got 12 long boxes full of comics. And it got to be a little bit much with some of the different things that were going on in the books. We got different reasons for getting there, but you know, there is a departure of things, not just because I aged out. I would say that that's kind of a misnomer. These aren't for kids alone. In fact, I would say that throughout the history of comics, it's been for everyone, and but a lot of people have sort of forgotten that. And I have other theories on the matter. But anyway, Doug Ernst has been sort of doing battle with all this, and of course, we got to a point where, as I would mention my first attempt at this video, we're already almost 4 minutes into it. My God. You see how bad this is going to be. This is definitely part one. But one of the problems with Marvel and DC is, of course, that there's no hope of us forcing their hand because fans alone cannot buy enough stock into Disney, who owns Marvel, and now AT&T, Warner, whatever they're going to wind up calling themselves, who owns DC. And we just feel like there's bad decisions being made, and they've kind of forgotten their place in respect to who is buying and what the demands of the customers are. There's been a little bit of change here and there, but it's definitely not like in the heyday of the 80s going into the 90s. And I know that there's probably some really good runs in the aughts, as they say, but they kind of scared me off. So there's a lot of backtracking I'll have to do and sort of seeing what had been going on in that time period. But I really kind of got really disappointed. anyway, so fan revolt gets to a point where the only way to really combat what's going on is to force their hand by way of competition. And so this fan revolt sort of culminates in what gets called Comicsgate. Most of the people who are going to watch this, because I have no followers. I don't expect to ever have followers. But like I say, I'm going to be making my own book with some help from some good people. And the aim is to make the, well, we'll talk about that later. Anyway, the way to fight it is to make a better product and to show the success of the products that are being made at a higher level, in which it will force their hands, if they want to stay in publishing, if they want to stay in the art form, that they'll have to match what we're doing. But in order to do that, and one of the reasons why I'm going to do some of these long form talks, is because I'm very, very supportive of the movement. And in order for it to work, we must have the absolute razor sharp best product possible. And in doing that, I'm hoping any comments that I make will be taken in the true sense of what critique is. And that is not to like run someone down or any artwork. I mean, we used to do this in art school. But it is to find out what you're trying to achieve and what could be done to make that better realized. And in the same way, I've gotten a number of Indiegogo campaign books, which is where everyone in this revolt is kind of coalesced in this movement called Comicsgate, which is a noble endeavor, and it's already faced its first schisms and things. All that being said, I think for the most part everyone is kind of on board with saving the art form. We've got our different tacks in doing it for sure, but I would count myself amongst the revolt. I kind of liken it to the Tea Party movement, what it was to politics. It wasn't a one-sided affair. It was holding everyone's feet to the fire was the idea of it. In the same way, we've got different ideas about how to go about making the best thing, but we all love the medium, and we have a decided interest in preserving it. So without further ado, as I'm trying to keep this within 15 minutes, and I'm 8 minutes into it. I'm sorry about that, but you see how this is going to go. So all that being said, I got to say, with all the campaigns that I've gotten, I have to commend Doug on creating something that is densely packed. I find this to have one of the most well, it might be unfair to say this exactly because his aims are a little differently than I think a lot of the campaigns center around superhero comics, with superheroes. And this is kind of actually it's a more super hero, but a different kind of hero. The basic synopsis is we track the life of a man who becomes a Catholic priest, and in his priesthood, he becomes a diocesan exorcist. And I think that's where a lot of the appeal will be to people. You don't have to be Catholic to read this, and it's not necessarily set up as a proselytizing endeavor. It is to tell a really good story, and a lot of people probably, the subject matter is best known through movies like The Exorcist. And to that end, Father Retter, who is our protagonist, is through his life and his life experiences gets drawn into chasing after subjects dealing with the occult, and he's performed several exorcisms. And as we'll see as the story progresses, that he lives in a small town that's riddled with the occult. I've got things to say about that, which I find really kind of funny as a story matter. And he gets drafted into an order of priests who are made up of ex-military people who have experienced hell on earth, which is a preparation in order to be able to deal with the rigors of particularly nasty demons as a group of exorcists. And of course, the thing that I will always harken back to when I think about The Exorcist, the movie, there's a local, I'm in North Carolina, there is a local radio show that I really liked, Tom Kearney's show, AM radio, fuzz and all that sort of stuff, but really interesting. And they were, he and his brother were discussing movies as they do on Friday nights sometimes, and they were talking about The Exorcist winds up getting called the #1 best horror movie. Most people would see it that way. But it's really not so much a horror movie as it's a movie about rescue.